Hey guys, Magic here, back with another Bitcoin video, because why not? This is the Desolator Magic the Gathering channel. So another question that a lot of people who are kind of new-ish to like Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies ask me is, why is it that you can't really mine Bitcoins anymore unless you have a very special device, and yet other people are rigging up big, rows of graphics cards and still using that to mine something? Like, how does that work? Well, way back in the day when Bitcoin was first being invented and the software was kind of first rolling out, basically people were just, mining with their CPU because that's what CPUs do. They do math. That is the central processing unit, CPU, of your computer. And mining of Bitcoins is really just one big equation. It's just a mathematical equation that, chips can do, basically. So that's cool. So people back in like 08, 09 were using their... oh god, like 09 Core 2 Duos. Woo. They're busting those suckers out and mining Bitcoins with them. And that was cool until people thought, well, there's another device common to computers here that would just be better. They're just more built and more suited to doing this type of math, and that's the graphics card. Because graphics cards, I guess you could say, are like at a basic level faster than CPUs. But really, it's that they're built from the ground up to be better at a certain type of math, and that math is obviously related to drawing graphical things in games on the screen. So you might have heard the term flops, and not just the reason that nobody watches soccer. It means floating point operations per second. So if you're real interested in what a floating point operation is, you can look it up. It's basically just like the decimal point moves around, and it's really, really big numbers, I guess. Or I should say, in some cases, really, really specific numbers. Well, that's what the Bitcoin equations use. So somebody said, well, I wonder if we could use like some developer API kit, which is like a, what does that actually stand for? Application Programming Interface? Basically a developer's kit for, NVIDIA or AMD, and just make some kind of miner that, fed in the calculations to the graphics card and told it, here, process this, and then receive the answers. And it turns out, yes, you can do that, and they did. So then everybody moved on to GPU mining, which is a graphics processing unit, which is like the core of your graphics card. So then it moved on to like multi-card mining, where the software could address more than one card, and then, people had to wait for driver support, and it was all just like a big mess, but it progressed. I mean, if you think about how many years it took, it didn't even really take even a year since like inception and an idea to, oh, look, a prototype. So then people thought, okay, is this the best there is? I mean, maybe every year, twice a year, whatever, a newer, better graphics card comes out, and then somebody buys it and it's a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient. But other than that, it's just, okay, this is the fastest we've got, right? Well, not quite. There's a device called an application-specific integrated circuit, and I can't really say it's a device. It's more like a classification of devices, or a type of machine, you could even say. I mean, that would be the application-specific part. It's like a calculator that's built to just do one particular thing. So it would be like the controller inside of a 3D printer or something. Or maybe some kind of like a physics processing unit, or like a hardware device that's specifically built to hack passwords, which I think is how the first FPGAs came out, which was like the precursor to an ASIC. I don't know what the difference is other than FPGAs are slower. I mean, an FPGA is basically just a tablet without a screen and without an operating system. It's just a processor and RAM, and that's it. So people actually started mining Bitcoins on them, and they were a little bit faster than a graphics card in some cases. Depends upon how you built it and how many, processing cores you put on it, basically. Or individual processors, because, well, the ones these days are pretty nuts. They have a lot of individual distinct processors all on the same motherboard. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, people said, well, theoretically, this has never been built, but if somebody were to take like 100 chips that would normally like each individually go into like a cell phone, a tablet, a whatever, a robot, I don't know. If you took like a bunch of those, put them all on one board, and were able to feed into like data into all of them together, and wrote, some software to do it and this and that, then that actually would be faster than a graphics card, because back then the Bitcoin algorithm was very processor intensive. It didn't require hardly any access to the memory. Well, there's some like locally accessible memory inside of CPU cores called register memory, and I think Bitcoin uses that more heavily. So that's why back in the day, like you'd have 800 megahertz memory interface clock on the graphics card, so it could talk to the onboard graphics memory really quickly, and you could turn that thing all the way down to like 200 megahertz and it wouldn't even affect the speed at all. All you would do is just like save electricity. So that's why people said, well, why do we have this graphics card with like a gigabyte of RAM that we're not using, a really fast memory interface that we're not using, and then only one core? So fast forward to today, and you've got like the world's most efficient, most powerful Bitcoin miner, which is the Antminer S9. I got some pictures up on the screen. These things are nuts. Every little heatsink underneath it is a dedicated processing core. or pardon me, a dedicated processing unit, and they're probably multi-core. I'm not sure. Actually, the specs of these chips are pretty secret. So these devices, they run at about 1200 watts, and they're capable of running around 13.5 trillion hashing algorithms per second, which is a lot. Back in 2010, we'll say everybody was buying up the Radeon 5830s. Those things, if I recall, could do about 320 million hashes per second. So, yeah, if my estimate is correct, that's about 4,300 times more calculations. And I think that's if you were to like scale it down to equivalent, power, the same amount of watts. So they're basically 4,000 times more efficient. So yeah, graphics card mining is dead. If you had a graphics card and you wanted to mine Bitcoins, you could run it for a year and probably make about 10 cents. I mean, back in 2010, prices of Bitcoin were about $5 a piece. So you could still make about, 20, $25 in a month. So I'm not sure how much memory or what type or what the memory controller looks like for these Antminer S9s, but I assume they probably have like 64 megs of memory or just like whatever, because they basically don't even need almost any. And then they have on those 3 blades, get this, 189 processors. Yeah, that's where the 1200 watts comes from. And so then you got fans that are about as loud as a vacuum cleaner, honestly. They're about 60, 70 decibels last time I checked, and they really blast the air through those copper or aluminum heatsink fins, actually. So then the controller card on top runs a little miniature operating system that knows how to mine, Bitcoins, basically, because nothing really changes in the algorithm. So, it just is what it is. You just program it to do one thing. Now, they are updatable, flashable, if you will. And these take some pretty custom power supplies to run. I think it's a power supply with like 12 PCI Express headers and like that's it. And it basically just does 12 volt. So they really don't resemble graphics cards at all unless you took 189 graphics cards and put them all on the same board and then got rid of most of the memory. So they're pretty cool. And now everybody mining Bitcoins basically has to have one of these. And this is where people started to have a problem. And I mean a big problem. Like people were very, very, very mad. When you're going to build electronics with sensitive chips and custom stuff, it's going to come from Asia, okay? Probably China, sometimes like Taiwan and stuff, they do a lot with chips. So they were finding out, people are like, even American companies, European companies, British companies and everything, they're putting in these orders for these boards saying, oh yeah, it's like a custom thing, whatever, it's not that important, we just want to order them. But then the manufacturers caught on, they're like, this is definitely for Bitcoin mining, especially since, some of them had to like write the firmware for the device. So they knew what they had, and everybody knew that if you were the first one to run an ASIC, like an initial, like very first ASIC, it would pay for itself in like 5 days. Like, I mean, that's a break-even point right now. If you were to buy an RX 560 right now, it'll take about 120 days to pay itself off. So these things, they were just so fast. I mean, the very, very first ones were still, I think, like 50 times more efficient and faster than a graphics card. So yeah, that was pretty nuts. So a lot of people that were like, hey, we're going to start developing an ASIC, they raised a bunch of funds and stuff. They turned around and said, guys, we're not actually going to sell these because if we sold them, we would lose money. I mean, at least they were upfront about it, unlike Butterfly Labs, who got sued, and I think they eventually went to jail for fraud because, well, the owner, the CEO, I should say, was, both. He used to do something with, like, lottery scams and some kind of lottery fraud in, like, another country, and he already got convicted, and I'm thinking, why does anybody trust this guy? And I grilled him, dude. I, like, destroyed him on the forums, personally. I don't care who I rubbed the wrong way. I was not trusting this guy, and I made my feelings known, and look, I was right. What do you know? But yeah, other companies, instead of like, oh, don't worry, we're going to sell these to the customers. And they're like, oh, sorry, they got delayed. They're not done yet. And then they're literally sitting there mining with them because it's making more money and lying about it. Others were like, we're just going to keep these ourselves and just turn them on. Sorry, guys, it is what it is. And then it went a step further. Instead of just, oh, cool, we're getting in 50 prototypes, setting up a server room, and yay, go us, tons of money, yay. The manufacturers, like the actual Chinese manufacturers, developed their own, with the technology because they love to steal stuff and copy stuff. That's China for you. And they just kept them. They're just like, okay, we're going to make a batch, but we could only make 1,000 of them, you guys. So they'd send off 1,000 and then actually make 4,000 and keep the other 3,000. And so people noticed, wow, there's an awful lot of what they call the difficulty rating going up, which is basically the total hashing speed of the entire network as a whole. And that adjusts how difficult it is to solve a block every 10 minutes in the Bitcoin network. So if more people are doing it with more calculation, then you make less money. That's just the short version of it. So people were not happy because they had to turn their graphics card miners off and sell their graphics cards. They were losing money on electricity like 4-1 at some points, and now it's like, what did I say, 4,000 to 1? So people are thinking, okay, so just if you can develop and make an ASIC, then you win, and the rest of us can't participate in Bitcoin anything anymore. And now China, a couple millionaires in China, and so since it's communist, basically the Chinese government runs Bitcoins. They own everything now. Wonderful. So yeah, people on the forums and stuff were pissed. Everybody in the community was pissed. So people were coming up and saying, hey, well, somebody already developed an alternative cryptocurrency called Litecoin. Instead of using whatever Bitcoin uses, I feel like I should know at this point, they used a different hashing algorithm called Script with a Y. And if you just thought Scripty, no, SCRYPT. So then people said, why don't we just invent a coin that it can only be mined on graphics cards? And that's exactly what they did. So I want to say the first one was Ethereum. That might not be correct, actually. But people were making all kinds of new currencies and saying, hey, guess what this one does? It uses a ton of RAM. It uses a ton of memory. So you can only calculate so fast. The core only needs to be so high clocked. And so the device in like the last 10 years with the fastest memory fetching technology and memory retrieval speeds are graphics cards, and really nothing can even come close. So without getting into like tons of math or anything, they invented a mining algorithm that uses something called a DAG file. That stands for Directed Acyclic Graph, and I read how it works and I only about half understand it. And I kind of specialize in math and programming, so what does that tell you? But let me try to break this down, and I'm not even sure if this is accurate. You take a whole crap ton of data, load it all into memory, and then you have to access that data and then process something with it. And that is the only way to do it. You can't shortcut it, you can't cheat it. So there you go. You got a coin that uses tons of memory and can only be mined with graphics cards. So now people are thinking, okay, Ethereum mining, and like Equihash and a couple others that I think are pretty memory intensive. So what's the ASIC for those? What's the application-specific integrated circuit? Could somebody do the opposite? Put one core on it and then just an absolute buttload of memory and memory controllers? I'll say theoretically yes, but it's a lot less likely, if not impossible, because honestly, the way I understand it, the only way that people could do it is if they were literally NVIDIA or AMD. That kind of memory fetching technology is just nuts. I mean, maybe like a major motherboard manufacturer or somebody who designs the memory controllers for Intel or AMD, or used to design memory controllers for, I'd say motherboards, but I think that's still chipsets, which were still AMD and Intel. So, I mean, in the future, could a device come out that has like little 64 megabyte modules and they each have a dedicated 64-bit, channel to them, like a memory channel? They all went into multiple memory controllers and the thing had like a 4096-bit interface. Well, I'd say yes, because there are cards out there with a 4096-bit interface and they're used for like AutoCAD Civil 3D and a couple like scientific things like simulations and physics and all that. But I mean, we're talking something, a factor of 4,000, that's a little rough. Could they make something maybe 10 times faster than the fastest graphics card? Even that would be pushing it, and it would cost so much money. Now, the cool thing is it wouldn't really draw that much power, which is, huge, because electricity is about 20% the cost of mining right now. But it's so difficult to make, everything's patented, and there's a shortage on high-speed RAM modules, and RAM can only be accessed so fast. I mean, the actual flash modules themselves, the little black things that you see on sticks of RAM and graphics cards, they only are so fast. So yeah, getting them to run above 1,000 megahertz, not counting like what do you call that, asynchronous or whatever, like double lane both way, whatever. It almost doesn't exist. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So you would need to have, like I said, a whole bunch of chips that weren't really necessarily all that big, but then each one a dedicated channel and each one a memory controller. I think it would cost $1 billion to develop something like that, and I just don't think that the very select few companies that can make something like that would even bother. It's just such an unstable investment, and it's not really guaranteed money. So I think we're pretty safe for now. I think for the next 5 years at least, we're just going to have like all kinds of, DAG file mining, just graphics cards. That's it. So that's promising. I like that news. Hopefully you guys are as excited about that as I am because, China sucks. But I got to mention the other stuff. You might have heard of Burst Coin. It uses hard drive space to mine, which is interesting. Now, it does still use a fairly beefy processor to process the data that is being read on the hard drive. But it's kind of like Ethereum, where the core is just kind of there doing math, but it's really just waiting for access time to the hard drive. Burstcoin is terrible. The people who wrote it don't know what the hell they're doing. It's massively insecure. The client is garbage. It runs on like Java. There's 100 things wrong with Burstcoin. Don't touch it. It's a lovely idea. That's great, but just don't. And I think, now this isn't my specialty, but I heard Monero is a new currency that its ideal mining device is actually a CPU. I thought somebody said that Ghost was that way, but I used to mine Ghost with my graphics card, so that can't be true unless there's multiple versions of it. I really don't know very many details about it, but I just heard that there's some kind of mining protocol that must just use heavy register memory instead of system memory or something. I don't know. That would be my only guess for why it would work best on a CPU. I mean, you got some 8-core with like 16 megs of level 2 cache. Yeah, you're good to go. So that's kind of cool that people are doing that. And other people, they assigned proof of work procedures, which really were in place already, for search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The SETI at Home program, that's been going since, God, the early 2000s at least. You basically process a bunch of stuff to see if anything looks like alien radio waves or whatever. And you just help them like crunch the data by like them sort of renting time on your computer, but you like volunteer it. But somebody found a way to assign a coin to it, which is cool. All you have to do is find a way to make your computer prove that it's doing work. Like that's why they call it proof of work, and you can put a coin on top of it. And then there was the protein folding. You might have heard of the project Folding at Home, which also has been around for like 15, 20 years at least. They're trying to help cancer researchers. So a bunch of people are like, yeah, I could volunteer my time for that. That's cool. And I heard somebody made a coin on top of that. So it's pretty sweet. I mean, if people are like, hey, instead of just burning up a bunch of electricity doing next to nothing other than maintaining the Bitcoin network or Ethereum, why not do something productive? So yeah, it caught on. It's not like, oh, it's $100 a coin now. I don't know, maybe it is, but I haven't heard of anybody getting rich off these like obscure altcoins, but who knows? It could go up at any time. I've heard of people taking hashing algorithms and somehow tying it to a domain name service, basically, like some kind of domain registration. Not really sure how that works at all. Well, it's called Namecoin. Look it up. And then, of course, there's Saya, which is somehow tied to some kind of Dropbox clone where you can like store your data in the cloud, and then somehow it's like secured with the blockchain, but I don't really know how it's stored and really don't understand Saya at all. So people are inventing all kinds of different coins. I mean, even on like Bitrex, there's like 100 different coins at least, I would say. Holy cow. And so look into what's popular, look into what they do. There's a lot of different things out there, and thank God it's not just Bitcoins, or it would just be, oh, look, China took it over, and that's it, the end. So hopefully that explains why, some people say, oh, I'm mining, usually they just say Bitcoins for simplicity. I'm mining Bitcoins with those graphics cards. I mean, they aren't. And then other people are telling you, no, you can't mine Bitcoins. That can't be done. So that's what they mean. That's the history of it, and that's how they work. So thanks for watching this awesome video. If you got any questions, leave them down in the comment section, and I will see you guys next video.